At this very moment, you're sitting somewhere comfortable. The temperature around you is controlled. You've got a jacket hanging somewhere nearby that you bought, not hunted. And whatever's sitting in your fridge right now will still be there tomorrow, no matter what the weather does outside. Now strip all of that away. No heating system. No jacket. No stored food. Just your body, exposed, in a winter so violent it could end your life before sunrise. That wasn't some rare nightmare scenario. That was Tuesday. For hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors faced winters so extreme that glaciers stretched across entire continents, and the cold could drop a person dead within hours. And yet they survived. Every last one of them made it long enough to keep the line going. You exist because not a single one of your ancestors lost that fight. Every winter they faced, they won. So the question worth asking is, how? How does a creature with no fur, no claws, no built-in insulation, a creature that evolved under the African sun, manage to outlast one of the coldest periods this planet has ever produced? That's what we're getting into. Because this is one of the greatest survival stories in human history, and most people have no idea how close it came to ending very differently. First, let's actually look at what they were up against. Because calling it winter is almost an insult to what it actually was. The most brutal stretch of the last ice age hit between roughly 26,000 and 19,000 years ago. Massive ice sheets pressed down across Europe, Asia, and North America. The landscape was open and flat and frozen in every direction with nothing to slow the wind down. Trees were rare. Animals that could be hunted disappeared for months. And the human body, let's be honest, was not designed for any of this. We are a tropical species. Our biology still reflects that. We have no thick coat of fur. We carry nowhere near the fat reserves of an Arctic animal. We can't drop our metabolism and sleep through the cold like a hibernating bear. We can't migrate thousands of miles south like the birds do. Strip a modern person of their clothes and their gear in genuine ice age cold and the body starts failing within hours. It shuts down. That's it. Every animal around them was better equipped. Mammoths carried thick layers of fur and fat. Cave bears could simply go underground and wait the season out. Reindeer just walked to warmer ground. Humans had none of those options available. On every biological measure, we should have been gone. Wrong species, wrong climate, wrong everything. But there was one thing we had that nothing else around us possessed. A brain capable of thinking ahead. And hands that could turn those thoughts into physical objects. It turned out that was enough. Barely. But enough, nothing else works without this, so this is where it starts. Humans had been using fire long before the Ice Age. Evidence goes back at least 300,000 to 400,000 years. But by the time the glaciers peaked, fire wasn't a useful skill anymore. It was the entire foundation of staying alive. And they weren't just keeping small flames going. Archaeologists excavating ancient fire sites in Ukraine found something unexpected: carefully constructed hearths, not rough fire pits. One of them had burned at temperatures exceeding 600 degrees Celsius. That's above 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit. These weren't accidental fires. These were engineered ones. When forests thinned out and wood became scarce, they didn't stop. They burned animal fat and bone instead. Fire meant warmth. It meant cooked food, which extracts more calories from the same amount of meat. It meant hardened tools. It meant light during the months when the sun barely appeared above the horizon. Without fire, nothing else on this list matters. It was the first wall between them and death. The problem with fire is you can't carry it with you. The moment you step away from it, the cold rushes back in. So ancient humans solved that problem by doing something no other animal on Earth could think to do: they took the insulation off other animals and wore it themselves. Early on, it was rough. Animal skins draped over the shoulders. But even that was significant. We have evidence that people in northern Europe were skinning cave bears for their hides at least 300,000 years ago. We know because of the cut patterns left on bear paw bones, precise marks in exactly the spots you'd cut to remove a skin without damaging it. Bear hide is thick, wind-resistant, and naturally water-repellent. As a cloak, it kept out a meaningful amount of cold. But a loose skin still leaks warmth through every gap and opening. It wasn't enough on its own. The real leap forward came around 30,000 years ago, and it arrived in the form of something so small it seems almost impossible that it changed everything. A sewing needle. A thin sliver of bone or ivory with a tiny hole worked through it. One archaeologist described the needle as possibly the single most important invention in all of human history. That's a bold claim. But consider what it actually made possible. The needle meant fitted clothing. It meant seams that closed completely. It meant sleeves that sealed at the wrist, hoods that fit tight around the face, layered garments that trapped warm air against the skin. There is an enormous difference between draping an animal skin over your body and wearing a constructed coat that fits. The needle is exactly what separated those two things. Beyond the larger outer layers, hunters rubbed rendered animal fat, tallow, directly onto their exposed skin before heading out. It sealed moisture in and blocked wind from pulling body heat away. Practical, effective, and yes, somewhat unpleasant. And for the eyes, another problem solved with simple tools. The intense glare of sunlight bouncing off open snowfields can cause snow blindness within hours. Ice Age hunters carved narrow slits into thin pieces of bone and tied them over their eyes, cutting the glare to a manageable level. Functional eye protection, made from whatever was lying around. The image most people have of Ice Age humans is everyone crammed into a cave. Reality was more sophisticated than that. Yes, natural caves were used where available. But across the open plains of what is now Ukraine and Russia, there were no caves. And wood was far too scarce to build with. So they used what was everywhere, mammoth bones. At a site called Mazirik, researchers uncovered circular structures built almost entirely from mammoth remains. Skulls and large limb bones were set into the ground as a base. Ribs and curved tusks formed the upper frame. A single structure could contain the bones of dozens of animals. The frames were then covered with hides, packed with moss, and sealed with earth. The largest of these structures is approximately 18,000 years old, built right in the coldest part of the Ice Age. And the site shows evidence of repeated occupation across hundreds of years. These weren't emergency shelters. They were homes people returned to, maintained, and improved over generations. The engineering inside those homes was also smarter than it looks. Many were built with the entrance set lower than the main sleeping area. Cold air, being heavier than warm air, would sink down into the entryway and stay there while warmth collected up where the family slept. That's an understanding of basic thermodynamics, applied in practice, tens of thousands of years before anyone wrote it down. Snow was another tool. Thick snow walls packed around a shelter act as powerful insulation. Even when outside temperatures drop to 30 below, a properly banked interior can stay near freezing, which is far more survivable than open exposure. The principle behind the igloo was understood long before the igloo was formalized. Site selection mattered too. A shelter positioned inside a tree lean rather than on open ground blocks enormous amounts of wind. Anyone who has stepped from an open field into a forest on a bitterly cold day knows exactly what that difference feels like. Every gap in a structure was sealed. Moss, packed earth, and pine pitch, the sticky resin from pine trees, closed off drafts and held warmth inside. Staying warm gets you through the night. Starvation is winter's slower weapon, and ancient humans took it seriously. They hunted big and they stored everything they could. A successful kill wasn't just today's meal. The cold itself served as a natural freezer, keeping large quantities of meat preserved for weeks. Surplus food was also smoked, dried into jerky, and stored in pits dug into the frozen ground, where stable low temperatures kept it from spoiling. There is evidence that some groups weighed mammoth meat down with stones and submerged it in cold ponds, using natural water as a refrigeration system. No moving parts, no power source, nothing that could fail. Nothing from a kill was discarded. Every part of an animal had a use: meat for food, fat for fuel and skin treatment, bones for tools and construction, sinew for thread. The efficiency was total. Hunting was organized, not random. At a site near a limestone cliff in eastern France, Ice Age hunters used coordinated fire and group movements to drive entire herds of wild horses and reindeer into a natural dead end. Not once. The same location was used for tens of thousands of years. Plan ahead, kill in quantity, preserve what you can't eat immediately. That strategy is a substantial part of the reason the species made it through. Here's something simple that gets overlooked. People slept together. Not in the sentimental sense, in the physical, practical sense of sharing confined space with multiple bodies generating heat. Living quarters in Ice Age winters were deliberately packed. Many people under one structure meant combined body heat, and body heat is a meaningful thermal source when enough of it is concentrated in a small space. The people who died first in severe cold snaps were typically the isolated ones. Elderly individuals living without close companions. The cold didn't discriminate, but it hit the solitary hardest. Community wasn't just social comfort. It was a survival mechanism. That said, life was not peaceful. Resources were limited, tensions ran high, and violence between groups was real. When starvation became severe enough, some groups turned to cannibalism. The archaeological evidence for this is clear. Survival pushed people to the absolute edge of what they were willing to do. Animals also helped. In later periods, people in severely cold climates brought livestock into the lower levels of their homes during winter. The body heat of cattle and sheep radiates upward, warming the living space above. You were, in effect, living on top of a biological furnace. Some populations didn't just find external solutions. Their bodies changed. The Yagan people, who lived at the southernmost tip of South America in conditions most people would find unbearable, maintained higher resting metabolic rates than other human groups. Their bodies produced more internal heat. They also adopted a resting posture that tucked the limbs in close to the core, reducing the surface area, losing warmth to the air. Their adaptation to cold wasn't technological. It was biological, and then there's the strangest possibility of all. At a site in Spain called the Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones, researchers studied skeletal remains from early human ancestors dating back around 430,000 years. The bones showed something unusual. Damage patterns that repeated in cycles. Growth that stopped and restarted. Signs of extended vitamin D deficiency. Interrupted development in young individuals. All of it matching the pattern seen in animals that hibernate, where the metabolism slows dramatically, caloric intake drops to near zero, and the body begins drawing on its own reserves. The researchers proposed that when fatty food became impossible to find in the worst of winter, these early humans may have retreated into caves and entered a form of deep metabolic slowdown to wait out the season. It remains contested. Other scientists point to alternative explanations for the same bone damage. It has not been settled. But the fact that serious researchers are still actively debating it means we can't simply dismiss it. The idea that some of your ancestors may have slept through winter like bears isn't fantasy. It's an open scientific question. And here's what's worth sitting with for a moment. Everything described above, the fire, the fitted clothing, the bone houses, the food storage, the cooperative living, none of it was written down. None of it was taught in any classroom. It was figured out through direct experience, passed on through demonstration and memory, refined over thousands of years by people who had no margin for error. Getting it wrong didn't mean a bad season. It meant not surviving to the next one. In just a few thousand years, a blink in the context of this timeline, we went from constructing shelters out of mammoth bones to adjusting a thermostat. The thing that killed our ancestors by the thousands is now something most of us experience as a minor inconvenience. We didn't just survive winter. We made it almost irrelevant. That's the story. And it's worth knowing.